Welcome back to the Resurgence Athletics podcast. My name's Dr. Goodell,
I'm Dr. Lucas Noguera.
and we're on podcast 14.
All right.
Welcome back. And we're going to switch it up a little bit. We're going to get into some more sports-specific stuff, and we're talking about soccer today, specifically soccer injuries, which you are an expert on.
Sure.
So you played soccer growing up, right? And now you're a PT.
I am.
Retroactively, hindsight, anything you wish you knew now, back then, that you know now about soccer, and specifically maybe injury management or training?
Sure. I would definitely say how important strength training is in conjunction with being an athlete.
Yeah.
I myself have had a few injuries throughout my soccer career, all of which, prior to my PT knowledge, I kind of just rested and thought it would get better on its own. And, definitely down the line, there's some aftermath.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get into that because you touched on strength training there.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think has become more prevalent nowadays with an emphasis on that. But we'll get into that a little bit later. And soccer's a sport that people typically play from the time they're very little up until like middle age. I don't see too many seniors out there playing soccer because
you'd be surprised. There's some men's 40 leagues. There's some,
Soccer is one of those like speed of play definitely correlates with injury though. And so, as you're growing, you're getting faster, bigger, faster, stronger, right? Like things happen, right?
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of things that can happen. So specifically today, we're talking about common injuries in soccer. So what are the top injuries that we're probably going to see? What is involved in those? Can we prevent them?
Yeah.
All this stuff that goes into these. So just riffing off the top of my head here, what are the list of your top like five?
Top five.
Or however many. What are the most common ones that jump into your head off the bat?
Right off the bat, ankle sprain. I think soccer injury, I think ankle sprain. I think everyone at one point of their life have definitely sustained an ankle sprain, more so than not in any kind of high contact, high velocity sport such as soccer. Mm-hmm. I think of ACL. I think of MCL. Those are ligaments, right, of the knees. So very commonly, quick changes in direction.
We're just working up the chain here. Ankle, knees. Exactly. What else you got for me?
Well, we'll stay in that vicinity for now. Meniscus injuries, hamstrings. I am really working up the chain.
Keep going.
A lot of hamstring strains, a lot of adductor or groin strains that you guys probably hear more often than not. Any kind of lower body injury really is more likely in soccer. Concussions are also very likely just because of the nature of the game, the contact of it. So you do see that a lot as well on the field.
Yeah, those headers. A full speed soccer ball straight to the dome.
Yeah,
that's probably
back when I played. There was no restrictions on age. You just headed the ball when it was coming to you.
Right. You're gonna need to put those like the football guardian helmets on soccer players soon. But let's dive a little bit more into those. So you got ankle sprains, knee injuries, hamstrings, groin. What are some of the other ones I think of? You mentioned concussions.
Yeah.
A lot of volume of running, so shin splints, things like that.
Achilles tendonitis, patellar tendonitis, all your tendonitis.
A lot of strain going through the feet. So I've even seen a couple like foot fractures in my day. More like stress reactions and things like that.
Want to get real into it, right?
So, all right, starting. We'll go bottom coming up. Like you mentioned, there's ankle sprains.
Yeah.
Right. So many ankle sprains.
Yeah.
And the footwear with the soccer cleats, and now more so with the prevalence of turf fields.
Sure.
Does that have an effect on the frequency that you see with ankle sprains or even, knee injuries?
Sure. Back when I played there wasn't as much turf field, at least not high school level. I used to play in a lot of fields where it was just grass and not like the nice grass you're playing on. It's like
the nice divots.
Little divots all over the place.
Yeah.
So stepping into that, I think that was worse than having the artificial turf, in my opinion, depending on where you went to school or what field you would play on. I think the turf actually is a little bit better in that sense, but it also depends on cleats, right? If you're wearing metal studs, the flexibility of your cleats, the size of your cleats, right? That I think all of that plays a matter in how much ankle stability you're going to have there.
Yeah.
I know for me, I like to downsize half a size on my cleats so I have that snug feeling. And I, might not be the best, but it felt good for me and it worked for me.
Right. I think with the ankle sprains, like you look at like cleats, how do those interact with the turf that you're playing on? Is the shoe giving you enough stability? And those are all like non-contact ways that you can accommodate for preventing ankle sprains. And then specifically, you classify the ankle sprains. You can put them in like non-contact and then contact, right? So like, getting hit also happens in soccer. Slide tackle,
forget about it. Your foot gets caught somewhere. That's it. You're going down.
Right.
Those are one of those that are kind of not so preventable, which we'll probably get into. Dive a little deeper into that, but you get slide tackled the wrong way. You're going down, your foot's getting caught, and that's how that mechanism usually can happen on contact.
Yeah. So mechanism of injury for ankle sprains, you can just do the classic, like I just stepped wrong and rolled it. You can have a, contact injury.
Go up for a header and someone bodies you off. You land, your proprioception or your body's awareness of space kind of just goes all out of whack and you land on it and that's it. Exactly.
Roll your ankle on that. Yeah. There's all sorts of ways you can sprain your ankles in soccer, especially when things get all jumbled and a pile of people.
Sure.
Right. And then moving, up the knee, we have ACLs, MCLs, LCLs, all PCLs, kind of depending on the direction. We talk about contact. If you get hit from a certain direction, you're looking at all the ligaments in the knee getting affected there. And this is a problem in football too with the turf fields, right? With the ACLs, again, non-contact injury ACLs, from speed of play and turning and pivoting, right? Like we talked about that in a previous podcast. And, those are probably one of the more common ones that we would see in soccer, right?
I think
then the MCL, you'll tear that if somebody hits you from the outside of your knee and pushes your knee in. And then the LCL, the opposite direction, that's the ligament on the outside of your knee. That one can go as well. And then you have the meniscus in there too. Yeah. So many things.
Sometimes they all just go together. You just get a little happy triad there.
Unhappy triad. Yeah, that's right. And talking about injury prevention and strength training, which we touched on before. Strength training and specifically hamstring strength has been very closely looked at to see if that prevents or can help, reduce some of these injuries to the ACL and the knee. And one of the most prominent ones that they've looked at is the Nordic hamstring curl. Yeah. Right. And I think they were implementing that in conditioning programs and preseason stuff for the soccer training programs. And they were starting to find that, hey, when we have stronger hamstrings, our ACL and knee injuries just drop off like pretty significantly too. So that's one of those really important pieces into a good strength and conditioning program for soccer players and really field sports to prevent those ACLs. And that kind of gets us to, hamstring strains, right? So same thing, like how many miles do you run on average in a soccer match?
Forget about it.
I think I saw it's like 5 to 7. Does that sound about right?
I believe that. That sometimes, if not more, depending on what position you're playing, right?
Some overuse injuries, you're running a lot, and that, hamstring strains and groin pulls.
Forceful, that forceful change in direction, or that forceful sprint that you're going to go down the line. You can see it in a player's face, right? They almost give that like grimace, like, oh, something's wrong, something was pulled, something's not right.
And so some of the differences between what we talked about with like ligaments and sprains, strains, and tears, and then we're talking about here strains. So sprains are ligaments, right? And strains are muscles. Sure. Which one's going to heal faster?
So your strain is going to heal a little faster than your sprains, right? Just because of blood flow and whatnot. But your sprains are usually a little bit more challenging. They take a little bit longer. especially depending on like the grades. We didn't really jump into the grades today, but you know, grade 1 to 3, 3 being the worst, right? That's going to definitely make your rehab much longer, a little bit more tedious, a little more complicated, might require some surgical intervention. So, yeah.
So for those soccer fans out there, you're watching your game and you see a player go down, and you always hear the announcers start to speculate around. I love listening to this because as a PT, I'm listening to them talk about, you know, what's the injury, and we see something, we're like, oh, the mechanism of injury was like that. Yeah. And immediately you have that differential diagnosis pop into your head. The whole list of things it could possibly be. And you're just hoping you never hear the ligament word thrown out. You're hoping like, oh, I hope it's just like a muscle spasm or a strain, because that's going to heal way faster than a tear or a ligament injury. So especially with the variation in play in the multi-directional aspect of soccer, you're going to see a pretty good amount of hamstring strains, groin pulls, and things like that. You know, that kind of gets us, we're going to keep moving up the chain here. Concussions. So a little different than the other things that we've just talked about, because concussions is a neurological injury, right? In soccer, obviously, that's been a big thing to keep athletes from sustaining concussions. So like over the years, you know, what have you seen change in soccer to help prevent some of those things? Have they tried to change things?
Yeah, I feel like at least like the age in which you can actually header the ball now, I forgot the exact age at this point, but you know, they're having younger kids avoid that or stay away from that, especially as you're younger and your brain is still developing. They don't want to risk, you know, they don't want to have any risks there or any challenges there to, you know, development of the brain for a younger athlete. So I think that's a huge change. That's really important. That's something I wish they did when, you know, I was younger. But I think that's like the big takeaway there, that they've changed.
So not until you're older do they start
allowing
you to take some headers, and
it's, you know, it kind of takes the fun away a little bit, but you know, I'd rather be safe than sorry, especially if, you know, one of my family members are playing and you know, engaging at that age.
Was there a certain age that you were playing that, like, obviously the ball starts moving a little faster as you play because they kick it harder? Was there a certain age where the ball was now moving quick enough where you're like second guessing, like maybe I shouldn't head that?
Maybe, I would say probably like, you know, like middle school, like once you get like late middle school, like that's when everyone gets a little bit stronger, you know, hitting puberty, and it's, you know, it's, you're like, you're going to second guess that one. Like, I'll let that one go. That's fine. You know?
That was a thing for like me in baseball. Like when you're younger, you know, you're in the box and a kid throws a ball at you. You're like, oh, I can take this off the leg. That's not going to hurt. And then they start throw a little harder and you're like, maybe I should dodge that one real quick. You know, you try to take one for the team, but things start moving faster. You start having second guesses about, do I really want to get hit by that? Especially when it comes to your head. And we've had a whole other podcast on concussion management and things that go into that. And that's on the top of the list for soccer. That's up there.
I actually had a concussion my sophomore year of high school. I broke my nose. I had someone actually header me, went up for the ball, you know.
Right, because your head doesn't just get hit by the ball. Sometimes it's other people's
heads. Yeah, exactly. I had already cleared the ball, and here it goes. You know, I'm like, what's going on here? Next thing I know, I'm on the floor. I get up to run. I'm running in the opposite direction. I have my white jersey on, and it's all dirty with blood. Man. So, yeah, you know, not fun.
And how long was your concussion recovery?
I was out for, I think it was a little over 2.5 weeks. I was out for, it was more like symptom, like what we talked about in previous podcasts, like symptom like analysis and seeing how I was doing, and you know, making sure that I was asymptomatic before returning to sport. But I didn't really do this with a licensed physical therapist or anything. I just kind of had my athletic trainer at the high school kind of help walk me through that.
Yeah, the first one's always the least bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's when they start to compound. You're like, that's not good. 2.5 weeks, pretty quick recovery coming back from that. But definitely want to be cautious. We're moving on to the next one. Remember, we are going to go back down the body. All right, we're going to shin splints. All right, so what are shin splints?
Shin splints are not fun to begin with. You have the muscle that attaches here on your shin bone. There's also a periosteum that attaches the bone to the muscle as well. That becomes irritated, and it's mostly just like what you've mentioned earlier. It's that overuse, right? That constant pounding, that constant force, running, jumping, where you'll see this like very common, and even just runners, marathon runners.
Overuse.
Overuse, yeah. It's
great
not
example
fun.
of
If
an
anyone's ever
overuse injury.
experienced any shin splints, it's really not fun. Any lower body injury, really, for me, it's just it's tough to get through because you're always walking, you're always on your feet, and it's something that just especially when it's an overuse injury, can be very, very annoying.
Those are one of those ones with soccer players. I feel like they can play through it if it's mild.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that can just nag at you.
Sure.
It's not like a season-ending injury, but like can definitely diminish your performance, right? Because it's just like micro stress, chronic strain on your leg over time in the duration of the season.
Yeah.
Like how long is a typical soccer season?
It could be 3-4 months.
Right.
Depending on.
Yeah, and so if you're not conditioned going into the season, it's probably preseason conditioning and making sure you're having a good training program going into the season. You're prepping your body for this duration of the season because you can't train the same way you were in the preseason in season. So two totally different styles of training in the training cycle. You want to make sure that you're maintaining what you did preseason for the duration of the season, because I see that with some athletes, like their training program changes when they're in season, but they slowly start to diminish over the season. And that makes you think like, hey, for next season, like it's great you got through the season. Maybe we need to recalibrate and reassess next season.
Change some things up.
We need to have your numbers be better before the season starts, accounting for some of that tail off at the end that is inevitably going to happen because seasons are long. We see that with every sport that goes for a long duration of time. Baseball, soccer, football. Prior game is going to affect your subsequent games. Like I think sometimes people look at it in the vacuum of just like a one game. Like if you're a fan, you just watch the one game. It's like, oh, that's just that day. But the thing about sports, and especially as the season goes on, the last week's games can affect this week's games, can affect the next, can affect the next. And there's a domino effect. And also, injury management with players, you're looking at, your injury can also affect other teammates, right? Because then the workload of the playing time has to be redistributed. Right? And so if you're a workhorse on your team and you're eating up minutes on the field, but then you get hurt and your playing time goes down, now someone else needs to pick up that slack, right? So really factors into the sense of teamwork, right? Like you're all sharing the workload together and you're all managing injuries together and for the chronicity of the season. And so these things, even though they might not be season-ending injuries, can definitely affect other things within a team that have an effect globally. All right, last one here. Most common. Well, not most common. One of the most common.
One of the most.
Foot fractures, or I guess I would also put into that stress reactions, right? Like we just mentioned, like chronic effects over the course of a season. You're getting beat up over the course of a season. Your bones do too. It's not just muscles. This is our probably most common bone injury that we would see, I would say. And those kind of start as like an achy sensation. Right? And in untreated scenarios can progress to a hairline fracture. Nag at you too. When you do have a stress fracture, what's the typical protocol? You're probably not playing. And those are tricky ones too, because sometimes I've heard people describe them as they thought they had like plantar fasciitis, or like they might have rolled their ankle or something that they don't remember.
Even so, in some cases as well, like I'll even have patients, right, or people I know in the past who think that they have something wrong. They go for an X-ray, and many times it won't show up on an X-ray, right? If it's something that's early on, or if it's something that's still developing, and then they kind of just jump back into the field or onto the field and, think that they're fine when they're just doing more damage. So it gets tricky in that sense because it's hard to sometimes pick it up on the actual imaging.
Yeah, and this is one of those injuries where I really put an emphasis on, like, what are your shoes? What are your footwear? What's your footwear? Because everybody's foot structure is a little bit different.
Sure.
And, you can't just give everybody the same shoes or cleats. And that can transfer load into your foot differently depending on your foot structure. So looking at wear patterns and things like that on the shoes, and seeing how they fit and they snug, and how does that affect the mechanics of your foot too. It can be as simple as that. Like, you don't want the equipment you're using to cause an injury. Exactly. that is not a good situation. And that's definitely something to take a look at. There's also some injuries and myths around what's going to prevent injuries, what's going to help with injuries, how to come back from injuries. Yeah. I guess one of the ones that I see a lot is stretching is going to solve all these issues. And sometimes, especially with specific kinds of injuries like strains and sprains and stuff, those are lengthening injuries. Yeah. So we don't need to necessarily stretch more.
They're already lengthened enough.
Right. Is there another myth you could think of that?
I think maybe just like I get a lot of times, like just resting. I just need a rest. It's gonna get better. It's gonna heal itself. Yes, the body does an amount of healing on its own, but rehabilitation and getting stronger and strength training, as we mentioned earlier, all of that is crucial, especially if you're a higher level athlete, right? If you're just resting, it's not gonna cut it for you. It's not gonna get you where you need to be.
Yeah.
So I think the stretching and the rest, I just need to rest and stretch. You hear that all the time. It's like, no, you don't. It's the worst thing that a PT wants to hear.
Right. How are you going to prevent things in season when the thought process probably needs to be more geared towards, like, how are we preparing ourselves for the season, right? That's where the bulk of, I think, the injury prevention is going to happen.
Sure.
Especially with the conditioning, strength, and agility work, and like working on the mechanics of the agility work. Because there's sport-specific training, which is the soccer skill-specific stuff, but then there's general physical preparedness too, which is going to build all those athletic attributes, like what makes you a good athlete or a resilient athlete. Sure. And that's what we want, like, the strength and conditioning program to be like preseason. So I guess, if we're looking at these injuries, this list of the most common ones, some of them are unpreventable. Collisions, unpredictable events, right? But if we're looking at through the injury prevention lens, what are some tips that we can do to prevent some of these injuries in season?
So definitely strength training, right? As we mentioned, having an actual program developed where it's actually, tailoring to the needs demands that you need to have on the field, right? So I know for me, when I got to more of like the college level, it was a lot of like training with, a strength conditioning coach who like actually knows what they're doing and like that's their specialty, and making sure that you're keeping your muscles strong enough to be able to withstand the demand of the sport, the loading forces throughout the joints, and making sure that, you have that extra support, sort of saying, strength-wise.
Yeah, and this could be a whole separate podcast episode in itself. Yeah. Just like strength training, conditioning for soccer-specific athletes, because there's some specific things that they're going to need in season compared to other athletes, and just like body composition and like size and markers that you're going to want to see from like an agility, strength, endurance standpoint. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, but the bulk of that does need to happen before the season starts. And, having good baseline tools and assessments and having an athletic profile, you think of like, what is a soccer player's athletic profile and what are the demands that they're going to need to be? You could also branch that out into position specific things too, right? Certain players are going to have more endurance aspects to what they need to do. Some are going to need more agility aspects and things like that. we might have to do a separate podcast on just that.
Pretty much.
I could keep going. I could keep going on that. But, you know, in conclusion, you know, we have some of the most common ones: ligament injuries of the ankle and knee. Yeah. You have muscular injuries of the hamstring and the groin. Head injuries, concussions, that's your nervous system. Yeah. And shin splints and foot fractures. Shin splints can be more muscular because of the tibialis anterior on the front, and also a little bone stress reaction thing going on there, which kind of falls into the foot fractures. Those are bone injuries. So, you know, it's not just muscles that get hurt, I think is the important thing. Like there's a lot of things that can get affected. And those are just 7 of the most common ones. Then there's all the random other weird stuff that happens out there. And you got to know how to deal with all of them or how to proceed. But if you have any questions about soccer injuries or specific ones that you've seen, because every once in a while I get thrown a sports injury that I'm like, wow, how did you do that? And it blows my mind. Yeah. So I'm curious to hear about any other strange injuries that you've seen people sustain or yourself maybe have sustained playing sports or soccer. So let's hear about some of those if you got any good stories for us. Tune in next time. And I cannot forget the sponsor for today. So the sponsor for today is, again, us, Resurgence Physical Therapy. We're located in Verona, New Jersey. So if you need any orthopedic, sports, or have any other injuries, give us a call, come on by, and we can try and help you out. Yeah. So that's it for episode 14.
All right.
We're on 14, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. So, anyways, like, subscribe, share, click all the buttons everywhere, and we'll see you next time.